Hello everyone, how are you doing? Surprise tonight is that I am dressed as Strega Nonna. As everyone knows, we lost a great this week, Tommy DePaola. We lost a lot of greats this week. I don't mean to imply that just because I don't know their name or they didn't write a children's book that they weren't great. But as a tribute to Tommy DePaola, I unfortunately don't have access to a copy of Strega Nonna right now, but I do have this giant chunk of Italo Calvino's Italian folktales, and they definitely have the same wily spirit that Strega Nonna does, and they're not whitewashed in the way that like your Grimm fairy tales are. They're maybe not as dark, but there's gambling, there's drinking. They're stories about peasants for peasants, and really love them for that. So I'm going to read you a couple of them in tribute to Tommy, to everyone else that we've lost this week, and to my own Nonna, because she's healthy, but she's old. So keep her in your thoughts too, please. Okay, the first story is called Dauntless Little John. There once was a lad whom everyone called Dauntless Little John, since he was afraid of nothing. Traveling about the world, he came to an inn where he asked for lodgings. "We have no room here," said the innkeeper, "but if you're not afraid, I will direct you to a certain palace where you can stay." "Why should I be afraid?" "People shudder at the thought of that palace, since nobody who's gone in has come out alive. In the morning, the friars go up with the beer for everyone brave enough to spend the night inside." That is beer, like a light, B-I-E-R. Is that pronounced differently? I don't know. I'm talking about a light, not the drink. So what did Little John do but pick up a lamp, a bottle, and a sausage and march straight to the palace? At midnight he was sitting at the table eating when he heard a voice in the chimney. "Shall I throw it down?" "Go ahead," replied Little John. Down the chimney into the fireplace fell a man's leg. Little John drank a glass of wine. Then the voice spoke again. "Shall I throw it down?" "Go ahead." So another leg dropped into the fireplace. Little John bit into the sausage. "Shall I throw it down?" "Go ahead." So down came an arm. Little John began whistling a tune. "Shall I throw it down?" "By all means." And there was another arm. "Shall I throw it down?" "Yes." Then came the trunk of a body, and the arms and legs stuck onto it, and there stood a man without a head. "Shall I throw it down?" "Throw it down." Down came the head and sprang into place atop the trunk. He was truly a giant, and Little John raised his glass and said, "To your health." The giant said, "Take the lamp and come with me." Little John picked up the lamp, but didn't budge. "You go first," said the giant. "No, after you," insisted Little John. "After you," thundered the giant. "You lead the way," yelled Little John. So the giant went first, with Little John behind him, lighting the way, and they went through room after room until they had walked the whole length of the palace. Beneath one of the staircases was a small door. "Open it," said the giant. "You open it," replied Little John. So the giant shoved it open with his shoulder. There was a spiral staircase. "Go on down," directed the giant. "After you," answered Little John. They went down the steps into a cellar, and the giant pointed to a stone slab on the ground. "Raise that." "You raise it," replied Little John, and the giant lifted it as though it were a mere pebble. Beneath the slab were 3 pots of gold. "Carry those upstairs," ordered the giant. "You carry them up," answered Little John, and the giant carried them up one by one. When they were back in the hall, where the great fireplace was, the giant said, "Little John, the spell has been broken." At that, one of his legs came off and kicked its way up the chimney. "One of these pots of gold is for you." An arm came loose and climbed up the chimney. "The second pot of gold is for the friars who come to carry away your body, believing you perished." The other arm came off and followed the first. "The third pot of gold is for the first poor man who comes by." Then the other leg dropped off, leaving the giant seated on the floor. "Keep the palace for yourself." The trunk separated from the head and vanished. The owners of the palace and their children are now gone forever. At that, the head disappeared up the chimney. As soon as it was light, a dirge arose. Miserere me, miserere me. The friars had come with the bier to carry off Little John's body, but there he stood at the window, smoking his pipe. Dauntless Little John was a wealthy youth indeed, and with all those gold pieces, and he lived happily in his palace. Then one day, what should he do but look behind him and see his shadow? He was so frightened that he died. So that's that. The next one I want to read you is called The Man Wreathed in Seaweed. A king had his crier announce in the town squares that whoever found his missing daughter would be rewarded with a fortune. But the announcement brought no results, since no one had any idea of the girl's whereabouts. She had been kidnapped one night, and they had already looked the world over for her. A sea captain suddenly had the thought that since she wasn't on land, she might well be on sea, so he got a ship ready to go out in search of her. But when the time came to sign up the crew, not one sailor stepped forward, since no one wanted to go on a dangerous expedition that would last no telling how long. Excuse me. The captain waited on the pier, but fearful of being the first to embark, no one approached the ship. Also on the pier was Samphire Starboard, a reputed tramp and tippler, whom no ship captain was ever willing to sign upon. "Listen," said our captain, "how would you like to sail with me?" "I'd like that very much." "Come aboard, then." So Samphire Starboard was the first to embark. After that, other sailors took heart and boarded the ship. Once he was on the ship, Samphire Starboard did nothing but stand around all day with his hands in his pockets and dream about the taverns he had left behind. The other sailors cursed him because there was no knowing when the voyage would end. Provisions were scarce, and he did nothing to earn his keep. The captain decided to get rid of him. "See that little island?" he asked, pointing to an isolated reef in the middle of the sea. "Get into a rowboat and go explore it. We'll be cruising right around here." Samphire Starboard stepped onto the rowboat, and the ship sailed away at full speed, leaving him stranded in the middle of the sea. He approached the reef, spied a cave, and went in. Tied up inside was a very beautiful maiden who was none other than the king's daughter. Isn't that funny? "How did you manage to find me?" she asked. "I was fishing for octopi," exclaimed Samphire. "I was kidnapped by a huge octopus, whose prisoner I now am," said the king's daughter. "Flee before it returns. But note that for 3 hours a day it changes into a red mullet and can be caught. But you have to kill the mullet at once, or it will change into a seagull and fly away." Samphire Starboard hid his boat and waded out of sight on the reef. Once from the sea emerged the octopus, which was so large that it could reach clear around the island with its tentacles. All its suckers shook, having smelled a man on the reef. But the hour arrived when it had to change into a fish, and suddenly it became a red mullet and disappeared into the sea. Samphire Starboard lowered fishing nets and pulled them back up, full of gurnard, sturgeon, and dentex. The last haul produced the red mullet, shaking like a leaf. Samphire raised his oar to kill it, but instead of the red mullet, he struck the seagull, flying out of the net and broke its wing. The gull had changed back into an octopus, whose wounded tentacles spurted dark red blood. Samphire was upon it instantly and beat it to death with an oar. The king's daughter gave him a diamond ring as a token of the gratitude she would always feel towards him. "Come, and I'll take you to your father," he said, showing her into his boat. But the boat was tiny, and they were out on the middle of the sea. After rowing and rowing, they spied a ship in the distance. Samphire signaled to it with an oar, draped with the king's daughter's gown. The ship spotted them and took them aboard. It was the same ship that had earlier discharged and abandoned Samphire. Seeing him back with the king's daughter, the captain said, "Poor Samphire Starboard, we thought you were lost, and now, after looking all over for you, we see you return with the king's daughter. That calls for real celebration." To Samphire Starboard, who had not touched a drop of wine for months on end, this seemed too good to be true. They were almost in sight of their home port when the captain led Samphire to a table and placed several bottles of wine before him. Samphire drank and drank until he fell unconscious to the floor. Then the captain said to the king's daughter, Don't dare tell your father that drunkard freed you. Tell him I freed you myself, since I'm the captain of the ship, and ordered him to rescue you." The king's daughter neither agreed nor disagreed. "I know what I'll tell him," she answered. To be on the safe side, the captain decided to do away with Samfair Starboard once and for all. That night they picked him up, still as drunk as could be, and threw him into the sea. At dawn the ship was in sight of port. With flags they signaled that they were bringing home the king's daughter, safe and sound. A band played on the pier, where the king waited with the entire court. A date was chosen for the king's daughter to wed the captain. On the day of the wedding, the mariners in port saw a man emerge from the water. He was covered from head to foot with seaweed, and out of his pockets and the holes in his clothes swam fish and shrimps. It was none other than Samfair Starboard. He climbed out of the water and went ambling through the city streets, with seaweed draping his head and body and dragging along behind him. At that very moment, the wedding procession was moving through the street and came face to face with the man wreathed in seaweed. Everyone stopped. "Who is this?" asked the king. "Seize him." The guards came up, but Samfair Starboard raised his hand, and the diamond ring on his finger sparkled in the sunlight. "My daughter's ring," exclaimed the king. "Yes," said the daughter, "this man was my rescuer and will be my bridegroom." Samfair Starboard told his story, and the captain was imprisoned. Green though he was with seaweed, Samfair took his place beside the bride clad in white and was joined to her in matrimony. I feel like they could have given him a shower at least, but, who am I to question the wisdom of the ages? Okay, the next one is called, do I want to read that one next? Sorry. Okay, I want to read Anne 7 next. Daughter in this one gets called fat, which isn't great, but it turns out a lot better for her in the end than it would in most of these stories, which is why I really like it. Anne 7. A woman had a daughter who was big and fat and so gluttonous that when her mother brought the soup to the table, she would eat one bowl, then a second, then a third, and keep on calling for more. Woman after my own heart, truly. Her mother filled her bowl, saying, "That makes 3, and 4, and 5. When the daughter asked for a 7th bowl of soup, her mother, instead of filling the bowl, whacked her over the head, shouting, "And 7! A well-dressed young man was passing by just then and saw the mother through the window hitting the girl and crying, "And 7! As the big fat young lady captured his fancy immediately, he went in and asked, "7 of what?" Ashamed of her daughter's gluttony, the mother replied, "7 spindles of hemp. I have a daughter so crazy about work that she'd even spin the wool on the sheep's back. Can you imagine? She's already spun 7 spindles of hemp this morning, and still wants to spin. To make her stop, I have to beat her." "If she's that hard-working, give her to me," said the young man. "I'll try her out to see if you're telling the truth, and then I'll marry her." He took her to his house and shut her up in a room full of hemp, waiting to be spun. "I'm a sea captain and leaving on a voyage," he said. "If you've spun all this hemp by the time I return, I'll marry you." The room also contained exquisite clothes and jewels, for the captain happened to be very rich. "When you become my wife," he explained, "these things will all be yours." Then he left her. The girl spent her days trying on dresses and jewels and admiring herself in the mirror. She also devoted much time to planning meals, which the household servants prepared for her. None of the hemp was spun yet, and in one more day the captain would be back. The girl gave up all hope of ever marrying him and burst into tears. She was still crying through the window when through the window flew a bundle of rags and came to rest on its feet. It was an old woman with long eyelashes. "Don't be afraid," she told the girl. "I've come to help you. I'll spin while you make the skein." You never saw anyone spin with the speed of that old woman. In just a quarter of an hour she had spun every bit of hemp, and the more she spun, the longer her eyelashes became, longer than her nose, longer than her chin. They came down more than a foot, and her eyelids also grew longer. When the work was finished, the girl said, "How can I repay you, my good lady?" "I don't want to be repaid. Just invite me to your wedding banquet when you marry the captain." "How do I go about inviting you?" "Just call Columbina, and I'll come. But heaven help you if you forget my name. It would be as though I'd never helped you, and you'd be undone." The next day, the captain arrived and found the hemp all spun. "Excellent," he said. "I believe you're just the bride I was seeking. Here are the clothes and jewels I brought for you. But now I have to go on another voyage. Let's have a second test." Here's twice the amount of hemp I gave you before. If you spin it all by the time I return, I'll marry you." As she had done before, the girl spent her time trying on gowns and jewels, eating soup and lasagna, and got to her last day with all the hemp still waiting to be spun. There's no more relatable fairy tale princess than this girl. She was weeping over it when, lo and behold, something dropped down the chimney, and into the room rolled a bundle of rags. It came to rest on its feet, and there stood an old woman with sagging lips. This one, too, promised to help, began spinning, and worked even faster than the other old woman. The more she spun, the more her lips sagged. When the hemp was all spun, in half an hour, the old woman asked only to be invited to the wedding banquet. "Just call Kalumbara, but don't forget my name, or my help will have been in vain, and you will suffer." The captain returned and asked before he even got into the house, "Did you spin it all?" "I just now finished." "Take these clothes and jewels. Now, if I come back from my third voyage and find you've spun this third load of hemp, which is much bigger than the other two, I promise we'll get married at once." As usual, the girl waited until the last day without touching the hemp. Down from the roof's gutter fell a bundle of rags, and out came an old woman with buck teeth. She began spinning ever faster, and the more she spun, the longer grew her teeth. "To invite me to your wedding banquet," said the old woman, "you must call Kalumboon. But if you forget my name, it would be better if you'd never seen me." When the captain came home and found the hemp all spun, he was completely satisfied. "Fine," he said. "Now you will be my wife." Oh, good. He ordered preparations made for the wedding, to which he invited all the nobility in town. Caught up in the preparations, the bride thought no more of the old woman. On the morning of the wedding, she remembered that she was supposed to invite them. But when she went to pronounce their names, she forgot she found they had slipped her mind. She cudgeled her brains, but for the life of her, she couldn't recall a single name. From the cheerful girl she was, she sank into a state of bottomless gloom. The captain noticed it and asked her what the matter was, but she would say nothing. Unable to account for her sadness, the bridegroom thought, perhaps this is not the right day. Therefore, he postponed the wedding until the day after. But the next day was still worse. The day following, we won't even mention. With every day that passed, the bride became gloomier and quieter, with her brows knit in concentration. He told her jokes and stories in an effort to make her laugh, but nothing he said or did affected her. Since he couldn't cheer her up, he decided to go hunting and cheer himself up. Right in the heart of the woods, he was caught in a storm and took refuge in a hovel. He was in there in the dark when he heard voices. "Oh, Kalumbina! Oh, Kalumbara! Oh, Kalumboon! Put on the pot to make polenta. That confounded bride won't be inviting us to her banquet after all." The captain wheeled around and saw 3 crones. One had eyelashes that dragged on the ground, another lips that hung down to her feet, and the third teeth that grazed her knees. Well, well, he thought to himself. Now I can tell her something that will make her laugh. If she doesn't laugh over what I've just seen, she'll never laugh at anything. He went home and said to his bride, "Just listen to this. Today I was in the woods and went to a hovel to get out of the rain. I go in, and what should I see but 3 crones, one with eyelashes that dragged on the ground, another with lips that hung down to her feet, and the third with teeth that grazed her knees. And they called to each other, 'Oh, Kalumbina! Oh, Kalumbara! Oh, Kalumboon!'" The bride's face brightened instantly, and she burst out laughing, and laughed and laughed. "Order the wedding banquet right away, but I'm asking one favor of you. Since those 3 crones made me laugh so hard, let me invite them to the banquet." Invite them she did. For the 3 old women, a separate round table was set up, but so small that with the eyelashes of one, the lips of the other, and the teeth of the third, you no longer knew what was what. When dinner was over, the bridegroom asked Kalumbina, "Tell me, good lady, why are your lashes so long?" "It's from straining my eyes to spin fine thread," said Kalumbina. "And you, why are your lips so thick?" "That comes from rubbing my finger on them to wet the thread," said Kalumbara. "And you, how on earth did your teeth get so long?" "That's from biting the knot of the thread," said Kalumboon. "I see," said the bridegroom, and he turned to his wife. "Go get the spindle." Then, when she brought it to him, he threw it in the fire. "You'll spin no more for the rest of your life." So the big, fat bride lived happily ever after. She got a cool husband who made her laugh, and she didn't have to work. She got to eat lasagna all the time. Sounds pretty great to me. So that is it for me. I hope you enjoyed these stories, and I would definitely recommend checking out the rest of them. There are a lot of them. Yeah. Thanks for tuning in, and best wishes to Mr. De Paula and all the nonnas out there. Good night.